I spent 15 years working for the U.S. Forest Service, and if there's one thing I learned, it's that the deeper you go into the wilderness, the stranger things get. I'm not talking about wildlife or getting lost. I'm talking about the things people do when they think no one's watching. My job was pretty straightforward. I'd patrol remote sections of national forest, checking on trails, monitoring wildlife, and maintaining the scattered ranger stations that dotted the backcountry. Most of these stations were just glorified shacks, places where rangers could shelter during multi-day patrols or store emergency supplies. But there was one station, about 40 miles from the nearest road, that nobody wanted to visit anymore. Station 47, we called it, just a number on a map. I drew the short straw one autumn and had to hike out there to do a routine inspection. The hike took 2 days, and by the time I arrived, the sun was already dipping below the tree line. The cabin looked normal enough from the outside. Log construction, green metal roof, small porch. But when I opened the door, I immediately knew something was wrong. The smell hit me first. Not decay, thankfully, but something chemical and sharp. The interior had been completely ransacked. Furniture overturned. Supplies scattered everywhere. But what really got my attention were the walls. Someone had covered every single inch with photographs. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all thumbtacked to the wood. They were surveillance photos. Pictures of hikers on trails, campers at sites, people at overlooks, all taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. And in every single photo, someone had drawn a red circle around one person's face. Just one person per photo, always circled in red marker. I started looking closer and realized these photos spanned years. Different seasons, different weather, different people. Whoever had done this had been documenting visitors to this forest for a very long time, and they'd been doing it without anyone knowing. But here's what made my blood run cold. On the back wall, separate from the others, was a smaller collection of photos, maybe 20 or 30. And in these ones, the circled people weren't on trails anymore. They were in parking lots, at gas stations, outside their homes. Someone had followed them, tracked them after they left the forest. I radioed it in immediately, and within a week, we had state police and FBI agents combing through that cabin. They identified some of the people in those photos. Most were fine, living their normal lives, completely unaware they'd been stalked. But 3 of them, 3 people whose faces had been circled in red, had gone missing over the past decade. Different years, different circumstances, all disappeared while on camping trips. They never found who did it. The investigation went cold after 6 months. But here's what keeps me up at night. In one of those photos, dated from about 2 weeks before I arrived, I saw something in the background, just barely visible through the trees. It was me, checking trail markers on a routine patrol. Someone had photographed me without my knowledge, and I'd never seen them or heard them. I transferred to a desk job after that. Some people aren't meant to be watched. I drove long-haul trucks for 12 years before I finally called it quits. People always ask if I've got crazy road stories, and sure, I've got plenty. But there's one delivery that made me rethink everything, and it happened on a route I'd driven 100 times before. It was a January run from Memphis to Boise, carrying refrigerated pharmaceuticals. Time-sensitive stuff, so I was pushing hard to make my deadline. Around 2 a.m., somewhere in the absolute middle of nowhere, Wyoming, my check engine light came on. Temperature gauge was climbing fast. I had maybe 5 minutes before I'd blow the engine entirely. I pulled off at the next exit, which led to nothing but darkness and a two-lane road. No gas station, no buildings, nothing. But about a mile down that road, I spotted lights. It was a small mechanic shop, still open somehow at this ungodly hour. The place was ancient. Cinder block building, one garage bay, flickering fluorescent sign that just said repair. A guy came out when I pulled up, maybe 60 years old, wearing coveralls and wiping his hands on a rag. Super friendly. Said he could take a look. While he worked, I waited in the small office area. That's when I started noticing things. The calendar on the wall was from 2003. The coffee maker looked like it was from the 70s. And there was a smell, sort of sweet and rotten at the same time, coming from somewhere in the back. The mechanic came in after about 20 minutes and said I had blown a coolant hose, but he had a spare that would fit. Said it'd take maybe another hour to install. I wasn't thrilled about the delay, but I didn't have much choice. I asked if there was a bathroom I could use. He pointed toward a door in the back corner. I walked over, opened it, and immediately froze. It wasn't a bathroom. It was a small room, maybe 8 by 8 feet, with dirt floor. And in that dirt floor were 6 holes, each about 2 feet across and maybe 3 feet deep. Just holes, dug into the ground beneath this building. And next to each hole was a wooden stake, the kind you'd use to tie something down. I backed out of that room fast and made some excuse about not needing the bathroom anymore. The mechanic was watching me now, really watching me, with this expression that wasn't friendly anymore. He asked if everything was all right. I said yes, just feeling sick from the road. He went back to work on my truck, but I could feel him glancing at me every few minutes. I sat there in that office, trying to look calm, while my mind raced through what those holes could possibly be for. And I kept coming back to one thought. They were the right size for a person. Someone curled up or kneeling. When he finally finished, he quoted me a price that was way too cheap. I paid in cash and got out of there as fast as I could without seeming panicked. Once I was back on the highway, I called the state police and reported what I'd seen. Gave them the exact location, described the mechanic, everything. They investigated, found the shop abandoned. No mechanic, no equipment, nothing. The building was completely empty, and according to county records, it had been closed since 1998. But here's the thing. My truck was definitely repaired. The new coolant hose was real. I had a receipt, though when I looked at it later, it just had a handwritten number and no business name. I quit trucking 3 months later. Now I work at a warehouse, day shift only. Some roads aren't meant to be traveled at night. I'm a land surveyor, have been for almost 20 years now. My job takes me to some pretty remote locations, usually to establish property boundaries or prepare sites for development. Most of the time it's boring work, but every once in a while you stumble onto something that makes you wish you'd chosen a different career. This particular job was in rural Oregon, about 60 miles from the nearest town. A logging company had purchased a large tract of forest and needed it surveyed before they started operations. It was supposed to be a 3-day job, and I was working with my usual partner, a guy named Marcus who'd been in the business even longer than me. We hiked into the site early on a Monday morning. Dense forest, no trails, navigation by GPS and compass only. The property line ran through some pretty rough terrain, lots of ravines and thick underbrush. By midday, we were deep into the survey when Marcus spotted something unusual. It was a fence, not a property fence, but a tall chain-link fence, maybe 12 feet high, running perpendicular to our survey line. It was old and rusted, but still intact, stretching off into the trees in both directions. There were no roads nearby, no signs of any development, just this fence, miles from anything. We decided to follow it for a bit, see what it was enclosing. After about a quarter mile, we found a gate. It was padlocked, but the lock was so rusted it fell apart when Marcus touched it. We pushed the gate open and continued inside. That's when we found the buildings. There were 5 of them, arranged in a semicircle in a clearing. Concrete block construction, no windows, heavy metal doors. They looked like they'd been abandoned for decades. Moss covered the roofs. Saplings were growing through cracks in the foundation. But here's what was strange. Each building had a number stenciled on it, 1 through 5, and below each number was a word. Building 1 said receiving. Building 2 said processing. Building 3 said holding. Building 4 said treatment. Building 5 said disposal. We should have left right then. But curiosity got the better of us. Marcus tried the door on Building 1. It was unlocked. Inside was an empty room with a concrete floor and drains spaced evenly across it. There were metal rings bolted to the walls, the kind you'd use to chain something. And there was writing on one wall, dozens of scratch messages, names and dates, some kind of tally marks. We moved to Building 3, the one marked holding. This one was divided into cells, maybe 20 of them, each one barely big enough for a person to lie down. Metal doors with sliding panels. More scratched messages on the walls inside the cells. Dates ranging from the 1970s to the early 1990s. I won't describe what we found in Building 5. I can't, but I will say that we called the police from our satellite phone immediately and waited at the edge of that fence until they arrived. The investigation that followed made national news for about a week before it was quietly buried. Turns out the site was part of a Cold War-era program, something to do with biological research and testing. The official line was that it had all been on animals. But the things we found, the writings on those walls, they told a different story. The logging company canceled their purchase. The site was seized by the federal government, and as far as I know, it's still sitting there, abandoned and fenced off. Marcus and I were both asked to sign non-disclosure agreements, though I'm not sure what they could actually do to enforce them at this point. I still do survey work, but I won't take jobs in Oregon anymore. Some property lines are better left unmapped. I was driving cross-country alone in 2018, moving from Florida to Washington State after a bad divorce. I'd been on the road for 3 days, taking my time, stopping when I felt like it. Somewhere in Montana, around 11 p.m., I needed to use a bathroom badly enough that I pulled off at a rest stop. It was one of those small ones, just bathrooms and a couple of vending machines, no visitor center or anything fancy. Only 2 other vehicles in the parking lot, a sedan and an old conversion van. I parked under one of the lights and headed for the bathroom. The women's room was typical. Fluorescent lights, tile floor, 3 stalls. I went into the middle one and locked the door. That's when I heard someone else come in. I could see their shoes under the stall divider, sneakers, standing by the sinks. But they weren't doing anything. Not washing hands, not using the other stalls. Just standing there. I finished up and flushed, and those shoes didn't move. They just stood there, facing toward my stall. I opened the door cautiously. There was a woman at the sinks, maybe 40 years old, staring directly at me. She didn't blink, didn't smile, just stared. And then, in this completely flat voice, she said my name. My full name, first and last. I've never told anyone this, but my immediate reaction wasn't to ask how she knew my name. It was pure instinctual fear. I walked past her quickly, heading for the exit, and she turned to watch me go, still with that blank expression. I got back to my car and locked the doors. That's when I noticed the van had moved. It was now parked directly behind my car, blocking me in, and the woman from the bathroom was walking toward it. I honked my horn. She stopped and looked at me again. Then she pulled out a phone, made a quick call, and got into the van. I was about to ram my way out when the van suddenly started and pulled away, leaving the parking lot and getting back on the highway. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my steering wheel. But I got out of there as fast as I could and drove straight through the night to the next major town. I found a police station and reported what happened. They took my statement but seemed skeptical. Asked if I had been drinking, if I was sure she'd said my name and not something similar. I insisted that yes, she'd said my full name, and no, I'd never seen her before in my life. Here's the part that still haunts me. About a week later, after I'd settled in Washington, I got a friend request on Facebook. It was from a profile with no picture, no posts, and only one friend. Me. The account name was just a string of numbers. I declined the request and blocked the account. But the next day, there was another one. Same type of account, different numbers, same single friend requested me. I reported it and blocked it. Then another came, and another. For 2 weeks, I got these requests multiple times a day, always from blank accounts. Then they stopped, just suddenly stopped. But my car, which I'd parked in my apartment complex, had something new on it. A small sticker on the back windshield that I know wasn't there before. It was one of those family stick figure stickers, but it just showed one figure. A woman alone. I scraped it off and threw it away. I also sold that car 6 months later and bought a new one. I still check my Facebook requests obsessively, and I won't stop at rest stops alone anymore. Some encounters aren't random. I think someone was tracking me, and I think I barely avoided whatever they had planned. In 2015, I was working as a freelance photographer, mostly doing commercial and real estate work. I got a call from a development company asking if I'd be interested in photographing an old resort property they were considering purchasing. It was in the Ozarks, been closed for about 10 years, and they wanted documentation of the current condition before they made an offer. The pay was good, so I agreed. They gave me directions and told me I'd have to hike the last mile in because the access road had washed out. I packed my gear and drove out on a Tuesday morning. The resort was massive. Main lodge, probably 30 guest cabins, a boathouse, tennis courts, even a small amphitheater. All of it slowly being reclaimed by the forest. It should have been interesting, a photographer's dream for exploring abandonment. But something about the place felt wrong from the moment I arrived. All the cabin doors were open, not just unlocked, but standing wide open, some of them swinging slightly in the breeze. And in every single cabin, the furniture had been arranged the same way. All the beds pushed against the back wall, all the chairs stacked in the corner, all the curtains tied in knots. I started photographing anyway, moving from cabin to cabin. By the fourth one, I noticed something else. There were paths worn into the dirt between the cabins, like someone had been walking the same routes over and over. But the paths didn't lead anywhere logical. They'd go from a cabin door, circle a tree 3 times, then go to another cabin. The main lodge was even stranger. The front desk was covered in thousands of coins, arranged in careful spirals and patterns. The dining hall had every table and chair flipped upside down. And in what must have been the kitchen, someone had written the same sentence on every available surface, hundreds of times in marker. IT watches from the water, it watches from the water, it watches from the water. I should have left, but I'm an idiot, and I still had photos to take. I headed down to the boathouse. The boathouse was built over the lake, just a covered dock with a small office area. I walked inside and immediately heard splashing, like something large was moving in the water beneath the dock. I pointed my camera down to the gaps in the planks, took a few shots with the flash on, trying to see what was down there. The splashing stopped, and then I heard footsteps on the dock behind me. I spun around. Nobody there, but wet footprints were leading from the water's edge, across the dock, stopping right where I was standing, and they were fresh, still dripping. I ran, dropped my equipment, didn't care, just ran back to my car as fast as I could. As I was running past the main lodge, I glanced at one of the upper windows and saw someone standing there, watching me. They were completely motionless, just a silhouette against the dim interior. I made it to my car and drove off without looking back. Called the development company and told them I couldn't complete the job. Made up some excuse about the site being too dangerous. They weren't happy, but I didn't care. 2 months later, I saw a news article. The resort property had been purchased by a different company. They'd sent a crew in to start demolition prep. One of the workers found something in the lake, just off the boathouse. It was a chain anchored to the lake bed, leading down into deeper water. When police divers investigated, they found it was attached to a car with 2 bodies inside, dated the disappearances from 2004. But here's what the article didn't mention, what I only found out later through a contact at the sheriff's department. Inside that main lodge, in one of the upstairs rooms, they found a living space. Someone had been living there recently, very recently. There was food, supplies, everything you'd need to stay for months. And there were photographs, hundreds of them, taken from various windows and positions around the resort. Photos of everyone who'd visited over the past few years. Hikers, explorers, photographers like me, all of us documented, watched, recorded. They never found who was living there. But I still have those photos I took before I ran. And when I look at them now, I can see it. In the background of almost every shot, if you look carefully, there's someone there, just barely visible in doorways, behind trees, reflected in windows. I wasn't alone at that resort. I was never alone. And whatever was watching me, whatever is still watching that place, it's patient. It waits, it documents, and it's still there,